Okay, let's take a look at what's going on with our identity service. And first of all, we'll take a look at the CS_proj file that this one comes with. Now, in my case, even with the latest version of their templates, it is targeting .NET 6, this project, and it's using version 6 of various packages. Now, this will work fine for us for now, but a bit later when it comes to Dockerizing our applications, then we're going to run into an issue with the way that we create the Docker files for those if we keep this on .NET 6. Now, Identity Server does work fine using .NET 7, so I'm going to update the target framework to use .NET 7. And what this means is that we also need to update the other packages inside here for Entity Framework related packages especially, and get them to the latest version. Also, what this uses by default, or what it comes with, is it uses SQLite, and we're not going to be using that in this course. What we will do is add the Postgres package into this so that we can use our already existing Postgres server to be responsible for the database that we're going to be creating for Identity Server. So we're going to remove SQLite anyway from this project file. And then we're just going to update all of the other packages to be their latest version. And I'm not going to worry about these two packages for the logging that's being used. It's using Serilog rather than the default .NET logging. And we've also got a provider here for Google. And this is just an example they've provided with the template of how we could use Google as an option with Identity Server, but we're not going to touch that. We're going to be using Identity Server to provide our authentication and store our users. We're not going to touch Google authentication in this. So that means we just need to update these 4 packages to their latest versions. And I'm just going to go and copy the package name into my clipboard. I'm going to open up the NuGet gallery. And I'm going to search for the package. And I'm going to select it. And I'm just going to tick the box where we've already got the Identity Service package installed for this. And I'm just going to install the latest version available, which is 7.0.8 in my case. Now we'll need to do the same for each one of these packages inside here. So please go ahead and do that. I'm just going to do it myself, pause the video, and then show you what happens or what the versions are that I'm using in this project. But please go ahead and do this yourself. Okay, so once you've undertaken that activity, this is what I've got at the moment, and these are the latest versions at the time of recording for those packages that I have just updated. There's one more that we need to add though. We also need to add the provider for Postgres that we're using. So I'll just go back to NuGet gallery and just search for Postgres, and we need to get the MPG SQL Entity Framework Core PostgreSQL, and I'm going to install this into the Identity Service project, and latest version at the time of recording is 7.0.4. So this is what your CS_proj file should look like after you have carried out that task. And where's the Postgres one? There it is. So we also have this available for us as well. So let's go and take a look at what else is going on inside this project. First of all, we'll go into the properties and the launch settings.json, and we've just got a single profile in here. Now, I'm about to do something again, which is going to sound terrible, but there is a reason for this. But we're going to change this from HTTPS to HTTP, and we're going to run this on localhost 5000. So I know this is an identity server, and I know it's a terrible thing to be running this over HTTP, but the complexities of using SSL with Docker means that we don't want to mess around with SSL for any of our internal services for what we're doing here. We can do, but it does add a level of complexity that I'm not going to on this training course. And we are going to have SSL going from our client to Identity Server, but we are going to approach that from a different way than having each service listening on SSL or HTTPS internally in what will effectively be our networked services. They're all going to be internal services, and we're going to have an ingress outside of these services that's going to provide external access into those services, and that's the point we're going to use SSL for. So there won't be insecure traffic going to and from our services from external, but there will be insecure traffic on our internal network that nobody else can get to anyway. So we've got this now configured in our launch settings.json. Let's go and take a look at what else we have. We've got a data folder and we've got migrations inside here, but these migrations are for SQLite, so we'll need to come back and do something with this. And we've also got an application DB context that is deriving from the identity DB context, and this DB context provides us with user stores, such as for our application user, so that we can save our users into the database. And there's a bunch of other tables that are created as well, but we'll take a look at that soon. Inside the models folder, we've just got a single entity object for the application user, and this is deriving from identity user. Now this is not identity server specific, this is coming from ASP.NET Identity. And one of the more confusing aspects of what we're doing is the overuse of this word identity. It seems to be used everywhere. But the identity server, the Duende identity server, just think of that as an identity provider. And when it comes to ASP.NET Identity, consider that as a user store and a user management feature. Identity provider is really responsible for the issuance of tokens using the OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect protocols. Also, what we have inside this project is a pages folder, and this provides the user interface that is used to allow the users to log in to Identity Server. And inside our account folder here, we have the login page, and this is using Razor Pages to provide that functionality. We'll take a look at this very soon, but this pages area we're going to come back to very soon anyway. Also, we have inside here the www root folder because we're providing HTML back to the client in terms of HTML, JavaScript and CSS. And then we've got our app settings.json file, and we're using Serilog for the logging in Identity Server. A bit different to what we've been using previously, but it's just a logging feature that will display logs in our terminal just as the normal login does, but slightly different. And then we've got a config file that provides the configuration for Identity Server. We have our identity resources, and by default there's a couple of resources that uses OpenID and profile, so that when we do request a token, it's going to include the user identity using OpenID Connect and also information about their profile. So these are a couple of resources we're going to keep in place. We've got a couple of example scopes, just scope 1 and scope 2, that we configure inside here, and there's a couple of predefined clients that we'll come back to, and we'll create our own clients that we can use. And we're going to have two. We're going to need one for Postman, so that we can connect via Postman to Identity Server and get a token back that we can use to test our authentication. And we're also going to have another client for the client app we're actually going to create, which will be Next.js based. So we're going to come back to this as well, but that's where it is that we're going to configure it. And if we go to our program class next, then we can see there's not too much going on in here, just a couple of logging statements. We've got our builder to go ahead and build the web application just as we would do normally. More logging information about using Serilog. And then we've got an app builder and then configure services and configure pipeline. So what they've done is they've extracted this out into a separate class and provided an extension method. So they call a configure services method here and then call a configure pipeline, which is effectively the middleware. Below this, we've got an argument that we saw this when we created the project. It asked us if we wanted to seed the data, and we're effectively not doing it this way. We're going to do it a slightly different way. But that is what is going on when we first created the project. Then we could use that to seed data. We're still going to use what they've provided to seed data, but we're just going to do it slightly differently. And then we run our application. So the hosting extensions is where this extension method is coming from. And let's go and take a look at that class. Inside here, hosting extensions. This is what we typically normally see inside the program class as we've been using it so far. So inside here, we've got an error because we've removed SQLite, so we need to replace that with Postgres. But inside here, we can see normal things. Now, in order to provide the login page, then it's using Razor Pages to provide the view that we return to the client from Identity Server. And then we've got the service for DB context, and let's swap SQLite and say use NPG SQL instead of SQLite. Then we've got the services to add identity, and this is ASP.NET Identity, which provides us with the application user and identity role. And then we add the entity framework stores, and this is responsible for creating the tables in our database and then some default token providers as well. And then we've got the service to actually add Identity Server. And the default options it's configured is just some event information and what to do in the case of certain events, effectively emitting stuff to logs. We've got options emit static audience claim is set to true. I'm actually going to comment this one out. We don't want that for what we're doing at this stage of the course. That will cause us some problems the way that we're going to configure this initially. So we want to comment this particular line out, and then we have some configuration about the identity resources it gets from configuration, the API scopes, the clients, and we're also adding ASP.NET Identity with the application user class there as well. And we're not going to be using Google, so I'm going to remove the Google configuration here and just remove that and say builder services add authentication without any further configuration, and then we return the builder. The next part is for the middleware that we'd normally see inside the program class. Again, we've got some logging stuff going on. We're using static files because we're returning HTML, JavaScript, CSS from this server to the client. Also, we've got use routing, use identity server, and use authorization. And we've also got the map razor pages so that when a request comes into identity server, it can route it to the correct page that's inside our pages folder. And then we return the application. So let's give it a go. Let's make sure we can start our new service. So I'm just going to cd into source and identity service, and I'm just going to execute .NET Watch and see what happens. And it opened up a browser in a different window, and we should see the welcome to Identity Server that's provided by Identity Server. And please make sure this is running on HTTP and not HTTPS. So we want to see, even though it's identity, your connection to this site is not secure, which is fine for what we're doing. And what we'll take a look at next, now we know that this is up and running, is seeding data into our database. Okay, now that we've got Identity Server up and running, let's take a look at a few things we can look at right now. Identity Server publishes a discovery document where we can find metadata and links to all of the endpoints, and if we take a look at this and open it in a new tab, then this goes to the well-known OpenID configuration, and it has things like the issuer and various details about the authorization endpoints, etc. And our resource servers can use this to get the configuration of our Identity Server. Also, what we have in here is a link to get the claims for our current session. Now, we're not logged in, so this redirects us to a login page and provides the return URL of where we were trying to access before we failed and were redirected to the login page. And we can't do anything to log in at the moment because we don't have any user accounts in our database, and we are going to address that right now. So let's go across back to VS Code, and if we take a look inside the identity service, we've got inside our project a seed data class. And if we take a look at what this is doing for us, well, we've got a bunch of imports that are not needed. So let's first of all remove the unnecessary usings, and let's take a look. So we've got a static method to ensure seed data that takes the web application app as an argument. And then we've got a using statement which is going to go and get the application DB context, and then is going to attempt to migrate our database. We've seen kind of similar to this that we've used in our own code, and we can simplify this using statement nowadays. So it's underlined in blue, so let's just use the quick fix and say use simple using statement, and this looks a bit more familiar to how we did it in our other projects because this is the approach we've taken. So first of all,